Hi, my name is Vinnie Rossi, and I am the Audiophiliac for a day. We could end the video. I just wanted to do that. No, seriously. So Steve, we're at Rocky Mountain Audio Fest 2018, and Steve wanted me to talk a little bit about near-field listening, which is something that I have gotten more into over the last 5 years or so. To adequately describe near-field listening, we first need to understand a simple concept, and that is when in home audio, most of the time when people are talking about what they hear when they hear speakers, they're not hearing the speakers, they're hearing the speakers within the context of their room and how they're positioned within the room. And we all know, well, we want to all understand that the room has a large influence on what you hear. I personally think it sometimes could be at least 50% of everything that you're hearing is really the room itself. So with near field listening, that's the whole idea behind that is bringing the speakers closer to you. And there's no exact definition of what that is in terms of distance, but typically it's 6 feet, about 2 meters or so and closer. And I think, or even with smaller monitors, about a meter away from you, but not just, up against the wall, but more out into the room and having a big sound field to look out beyond the speakers. And if it's done properly and with speakers that are designed to be used like that, you could get such a large depth of sound fields, lots of layering, and things that you miss out when you listen farther away from the speakers, because the room itself, with all the reflections from the speakers and all that distance you're covering, you're losing. So for me, designing equipment, I like to evaluate in the near field a lot of the time because I hear a lot more into the recording and a lot less into what the room is doing. And when I make changes to the equipment, I could hear that more. So that's a big advantage of near field listening. Another one is that the amount of power required as you get closer to your speakers is you don't need as much power. So the general rule is if you were listening at, let's say, 10 feet away and then you move the speakers to 5 feet away, it's the equivalent of having 4 times the amplifier power. So that's a 6 dB increase of sensitivity. So when a speaker manufacturer says, well, we recommend 50 watts or more, you need to really describe how far away you're talking about, because as you get closer, to achieve the same sound pressure levels, you do not need as much power. So that's another advantage. Another one is the size of the speaker does not need to be quite as large because you're not trying to pressurize a whole room. Just as when you get into headphone listening, the driver sizes become very small because they're closer. It's kind of like that. But with headphone listening, and this is another thing that happens, is when people who aren't sure about near-field listening, they kind of see getting closer to speakers and they say, isn't that like headphone listening? And it's really not. Headphone listening is you have headphones on your head, the sound is in your head. You could do binaural recording, that does help get some spaciousness, but it's not the same as near-field listening when you are actually seeing way out in front of you the performers on the stage. So that's a totally different experience. And another thing that comes up is, well, desktop listening. And yes, you are in the near field, but it's not the same as having speakers, on stands, let's say, or you're out into the room, facing out into the room, not looking at a wall. Because when you look towards a wall, typically where your desk is placed, you're not going to see as much of a depth into the recording because it's also visual. The visual cues help you understand, what's going on. If you see a large space out in front of you, you could envision the performers there if the mix is done well. So some of the disadvantages could be the speaker itself is really not intended to be a near-field speaker. If you have multiple drivers that aren't coherent, they don't integrate well, you need to have a certain distance away, then that's not the speaker for near field. Another one is, well, you do need to have some space in the room to do it. You could use a small room, but ideally if you could get out into the room more and do it and have a personal listening space instead of a shared room where this is all out into the room, all this equipment, speakers and all in your chair, then that could be a disadvantage. And other disadvantage in near-field listening is pretty much, there's a lot of more good things going for it, but it's not for everyone. And I'm not saying it's better than conventional listening where you're a farther distance away, but it's something that you might want to try and enjoy because you'll hear a lot more going on in the recordings. And another disadvantage is sometimes with a stereo mix, if the certain stereo effects where they have like a vocal in one channel, like some of the old like Beatles stuff or what have you, it throws things off. But if it's well recorded, and it doesn't have to be a pristine recording, but something that had a stereo mix done right, you're going to hear more depth, and the speakers aren't going to sound like they're in front of you in the near field. They're going to sound like the sound is beyond this, where the speakers are. So give it a try, post about it, and try to enjoy it. Thank you.